Sunday morning, December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Oahu, Hawaii, 07:55 hours. The water of the harbor reflects the clear blue sky as the American flag rises above the USS Arizona. Seaman First Class Donald Stratton finishes his breakfast in the mess. The scent of coffee lingers in the air as he exchanges jokes with his shipmates. None of them know they have exactly 4 minutes of peace remaining in their lives. At 07:59, the sound breaks the morning stillness. A distant drone growing louder with each passing second. Seaman Martin Matthews steps onto the deck, shielding his eyes against the morning sun. The shapes materialize against the blue canvas of the Hawaiian sky. 183 aircraft approaching from the north. The rising sun emblems become visible on their wings. Air raid! Air raid! The words echo across the deck as the first bomb whistles through the air. On Battleship Row, 8 massive vessels sit in near-perfect alignment. Nevada, Arizona, Tennessee, West Virginia, Maryland, Oklahoma, California, and Pennsylvania in dry dock. The ship's massive guns point uselessly skyward, ammunition locked safely away as per Sunday protocol. Aboard the Arizona, 19-year-old seaman John Anderson rushes to his battle station as the first torpedo strikes the USS Oklahoma nearby. The concussion travels through the water, a physical wave that rocks the Arizona. The sound of tearing metal carries across the harbor as Japanese Zero fighters begin their strafing runs. No one aboard the Arizona yet understands that they are at the epicenter of what will become the worst naval disaster in American history. No one knows that within the next few hours, 2,403 Americans will perish, with 1,177 of those deaths occurring on this very ship. The crew of the Arizona doesn't realize that in less than 8 minutes, a modified 40-centimeter shell will penetrate their forward deck, igniting nearly 1 million pounds of gunpowder and splitting their vessel in two. The morning light shifts from golden to hellish red as the first fires break out across the harbor. Billowing black smoke rises into the previously pristine sky. The smell of burning oil, melting steel, and charred flesh begins to permeate everything. This is not fiction. This is not exaggeration. This is the documented beginning of 1,177 stories that ended in death, and of 335 stories of those who survived. This is the horror of Pearl Harbor as it happened, minute by terrible minute, through the eyes of the men who lived it and the many more who didn't live to tell their tales. 800 hours, USS Arizona, Pearl Harbor. Chief Boatswain Alan Shapley feels the concussion of the first bomb hitting the boat deck near turret number 2. The explosion rattles his teeth, sends him stumbling against a bulkhead. His ears ring as he steadies himself, years of naval training kicking in despite the shock. General quarters, general quarters, the call blares through the ship's communication system. All hands man your battle stations. Shapley runs, navigating the suddenly chaotic passageways of the vessel he knows like his own home. Around him, sailors rush to their stations, some still pulling on uniforms, others in their Sunday whites. The ship shudders again as more bombs find their mark on neighboring vessels. Through a porthole, Shapley witnesses the USS Oklahoma beginning to list after multiple torpedo hits. Men are jumping from her decks as she slowly rolls. The sight is incomprehensible. Battleships don't roll over, not these unsinkable behemoths of American naval power. Shapley reaches the boat deck where fire has already engulfed several areas. The anti-aircraft guns are coming alive, manned by sailors who have never fired them outside of drills. The sound is deafening as they send shells skyward toward the swarming Japanese aircraft. "Water detail! Get those hoses going!" Shapley shouts, organizing men into firefighting teams even as more bombs fall around them. A Zero fighter screams overhead, machine guns chattering, bullets sparking off metal and tearing through flesh. 2 sailors near Shapley fall, their white uniforms blossoming with red. The harbor has transformed in minutes. Where peaceful waters once reflected the morning sun, now flames dance across an oil-slick surface. Black smoke rises in columns from multiple ships. The air fills with the cacophony of explosions. aircraft engines, gunfire, and the screams of the wounded and dying. Shapley helps direct a fire hose toward a burning section of deck when he feels it. A different kind of tremor running through the Arizona. Deeper. Wrong. His eyes meet those of gunner's mate Russell Warner 20 feet away. Both men recognize what's happening an instant before it occurs. At 0810, a modified 40-centimeter armor-piercing shell from a Japanese bomber penetrates the forward deck of the USS Arizona, traveling deep into the ship before detonating in the forward magazine. 0810 hours and 30 seconds. USS Arizona. The world goes white, then black, then red. The concussion lifts Chief Shapley off his feet and hurls him through the air. The forward magazine, containing nearly 1 million pounds of gunpowder, detonates with a force so violent it is felt throughout the harbor and recorded by seismographs at the Honolulu Observatory. The Arizona literally lifts out of the water before crashing back down, broken. A fireball erupts 500 feet into the air, carrying with it the bodies of men, twisted metal, and burning debris. The forward part of the ship is obliterated in an instant. Every man forward of turret 2, hundreds of sailors and Marines, cease to exist. Seaman Donald Stratton, manning his anti-aircraft gun, is engulfed in flames. His clothes ignite, his skin blisters and peels. The pain is beyond comprehension, yet somehow he remains conscious, aware of his own burning flesh. 6 other men at his station suffer the same fate, their screams lost in the roar of the explosion and continuing bombardment. Below decks, in the engine room, Fireman Second Class Louis Grabinski feels the ship crack around him. Scalding steam erupts from ruptured pipes. Men who moments before were rushing to battle stations now lie crushed beneath collapsed bulkheads and machinery. Seawater begins to rush into compartments never meant to flood. The Arizona's back is broken. Oil from ruptured bunkers spreads across the water, igniting into a floating inferno that surrounds the dying vessel. Men leap from the decks into this burning slick, their desperate choice to jump from one hell into another. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua, the ship's damage control officer, regains consciousness on the quarterdeck. The explosion had knocked him temporarily senseless. He rises to his feet, uniform smoldering, and immediately begins organizing rescue efforts despite the continuing air attack. "Abandon ship! Abandon ship!" Fuqua orders, his voice somehow carrying over the cacophony of destruction. He remains terrifyingly calm, directing survivors toward relatively safe areas where they might escape the rapidly sinking vessel. Throughout the harbor, witnesses aboard other vessels and on shore watch in horror as the Arizona's destruction unfolds. The ship that had been the pride of the Pacific Fleet is now a twisted, burning tomb for most of her crew. And the attack continues. Japanese aircraft begin their second wave, targeting ships still unscathed and adding to the carnage of those already hit. The Arizona burns, her magazines continuing to detonate in secondary explosions, each one carrying away more of the ship and more of her men. 0815 hours, the forward deck of the USS Arizona. Seaman Donald Stratton and 5 other men cling to the burning remains of their anti-aircraft gun station. Their skin hangs in charred strips from their bodies. Their lungs burn with each breath of superheated air. They are stranded, surrounded by flames on a platform 60 feet above the water. Across a gap of 45 feet, on the repair ship USS Vestal, itself damaged by bombs and beginning to sink, Boatswain's mate Second Class Joe George spots the trapped men. Despite orders to cut the lines connecting the Vestal to the doomed Arizona, George makes a different choice. He secures a weighted heaving line and throws it across the gap. It takes 3 attempts before the burning men can grasp it. With what must be superhuman strength, George pulls a heavier line across, creating a tenuous rope bridge between the vessels. Stratton, with third-degree burns covering more than 70% of his body, helps his comrades secure the line. Then, one by one, they begin to cross, hanging by their burned hands and arms, pulling themselves hand over hand above the inferno below. The pain is incomprehensible. Their raw flesh sticks to the rope, leaving strips of skin behind with each movement. Two men fall during the crossing, disappearing into the burning water below. Stratton, nearly unconscious from pain and exertion, somehow maintains his grip until hands from the Vestal pull him to relative safety. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Fuqua continues his rescue efforts aboard the dying Arizona. He walks the deck as if immune to the flames and explosions, guiding dazed survivors to safety, carrying wounded men to evacuation points, all while Japanese aircraft continue their attack runs. Below decks, conditions deteriorate by the second. Compartments fill with toxic smoke, blinding men as they try to escape through suddenly unfamiliar passageways. Watertight doors, designed to contain flooding, become death traps for those caught on the wrong side, as they automatically close or are manually sealed to save the ship. In the aft engine room, Machinist's Mate First Class Robert Pearson leads a team trying to maintain power. They work in near darkness, waist-deep in rising water, struggling to keep generators running to power pumps and communications. They know their efforts are likely futile, but naval discipline holds. They will remain at their posts until ordered otherwise. The Arizona continues to settle into the harbor mud, its broken keel unable to support the massive weight of armor and machinery. Oil continues to pour from its ruptured bunkers, creating a spreading slick that burns on the water's surface and will continue to seep from the wreck for decades to come. 8:20 hours. Below decks, USS Arizona. Marine Private First Class Marvin Rewerts awakens in darkness. The explosion has collapsed part of his berthing area, pinning him beneath debris. Something warm and wet covers half his face, blood from a head wound. The compartment is filling with smoke, and he can hear the distant roar of fires. "Help!" he calls out, his voice barely audible even to himself. "Anyone there?" A beam of light cuts through the smoke. A battle lantern carried by shipfitter Second Class Ernest Rouse, who is checking compartments for survivors. "Here! I'm trapped here!" Rewerts manages to raise his arm into the light beam. Rouse rushes over, setting down the lantern to assess the situation. "Don't move, Marine. I'll get you out." The ship groans around them, metal stretching and tearing as compartments collapse. Water is beginning to seep in around their feet. "We don't have much time," Rouse says, straining to lift the debris, pinning Rewerts. The forward part is gone, just gone. Together they manage to free Rewerts' legs. Rouse helps him stand, supporting him as they make their way toward the nearest ladder. The passages are disorienting, transformed by damage and smoke. Twice they reach dead ends where bulkheads have collapsed. "This way," Rouse decides, guiding them down a different corridor. The deck beneath them slopes at an unnatural angle, growing steeper as the Arizona continues to settle. They wade through water that quickly rises from ankle to knee-deep. They encounter 3 more sailors, dazed and injured, and incorporate them into their escape party. At one juncture, they hear pounding and cries from behind a sealed, watertight door. "We can't open it," Rouse says, the anguish clear in his voice despite his matter-of-fact tone. "The compartment behind is flooded. We doom ourselves and wouldn't save them." The pounding continues as they move away, a sound that will haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Reaching a vertical ladder, they begin to climb toward daylight. The metal rungs burn their hands. The entire ship is becoming a superheated oven. Emerging onto a section of the aft deck, they confront a scene from Dante's Inferno. The sky has vanished behind walls of black smoke. The deck is a maze of twisted metal, fire, and bodies. Japanese aircraft continue to strafe the ship, bullets ricocheting off metal with sharp whines. Lieutenant Commander Fuqua spots them and waves them toward the port side, where a motor launch is taking on survivors. "Move! Now!" he shouts, providing covering fire with his sidearm as a Zero makes another pass. They run, half carrying each other, across the burning deck. Marines from the launch help pull them aboard as Lieutenant Commander Fuqua remains behind, continuing his search for more survivors. 8:30 hours. The harbor waters surrounding the USS Arizona. Radioman Third Class Charles Britton treads water, his life jacket keeping him afloat in the oil-slicked harbor. He had leapt from the port side as the ship began its final plunge. The jump, nearly 50 feet into churning, burning water, should have killed him. Somehow he survived. The water is a nightmarish soup of oil, burning debris and bodies. Some of the bodies move, wounded sailors struggling to stay afloat. Others float face down, motionless. Britain swims toward the nearest living man, a young seaman he doesn't recognize, whose strength is clearly failing. "Hold on to me," Britain says, supporting the wounded sailor. "Rescue's coming." "My legs," the sailor gasps. "Can't feel my legs." Britain doesn't look below the waterline, doesn't want to know what injuries the murky, oil-covered surface conceals. Just hold on. Around them, the harbor continues to erupt with explosions as more ships are hit. The USS Nevada, having managed to build up steam, makes a desperate run for the harbor entrance, drawing the attention of Japanese bombers away from the other crippled battleships. A motor launch approaches, already overloaded with survivors. Hands reach down, pulling Britain and the wounded sailor aboard. The small craft's gunwale sits inches above the waterline with the weight of so many men. "Arizona?" a rescued officer from another vessel asks Britain. "Gone, sir," Britain replies, his voice flat with shock. "She's gone." From their position in the launch, they can see the Arizona has settled into the harbor mud, her superstructure still above water, but engulfed in flames so intense they distort the air above them. Secondary explosions continue to shake what remains of the once mighty battleship. The launch's motor strains as the coxswain maneuvers toward Ford Island, avoiding burning oil slicks and debris. A Zero fighter appears, swooping low over the harbor. The men in the boat freeze, utterly exposed and defenseless. The Japanese pilot looks directly at them as he passes. For a reason none will ever know, he doesn't fire. Perhaps seeing the boat overloaded with wounded men stirred some remnant of humanity. Perhaps he was simply out of ammunition. The fighter continues on, strafing another target further away. Reaching the shore of Ford Island, the survivors disembark, many needing to be carried. Medical personnel rush to meet them, setting up triage areas that are quickly overwhelmed. Britain helps the sailor with injured legs onto a stretcher, then turns back toward the harbor. From this vantage point, the full scope of the attack becomes apparent. The entire harbor is a vision of apocalyptic destruction. Every battleship has been hit. The Oklahoma has completely capsized. The West Virginia and California are settling onto the harbor bottom. And the Arizona. The Arizona is a funeral pyre, burning with an intensity that seems to consume the sky itself. 8:45 hours. Medical station, Ford Island. Pharmacist's mate, second class. Vernon French works frantically, his hands covered in blood as he moves from one injured sailor to the next. The medical station, never designed to handle casualties of this magnitude, is overwhelmed within minutes of the attack's start. "Burn victims from the Arizona over here," shouts a doctor, directing stretcher bearers. French moves to assist, unwrapping field dressings to cover horrific burns. The injured men's uniforms have fused with their skin in many cases. Some still smoke, the fabric and flesh continuing to smolder. The screams as the medical personnel work are unlike anything French has ever heard, and will hear in nightmares for the rest of his life. Seaman Donald Stratton, one of the men who crossed the line from the Arizona to the Vestal, lies on a stretcher. More than 2/3 of his body is covered in third-degree burns. By any reasonable medical assessment, he should not be alive. Yet his eyes remain open, tracking French's movements as the pharmacist's mate applies tannic acid to his ravaged skin. "The others?" Stratton manages to ask, his lips cracking and bleeding with the effort. "We're treating everyone we can," French answers, unable to provide more specific information about Stratton's shipmates. The truth, which French cannot bring himself to share, is that many of the Arizona's burn victims are already dying. Their injuries are simply too severe for the medical capabilities of 1941. The handful of doctors work triage, identifying those with some chance of survival versus those who are beyond help. Outside, the attack continues. The medical station shakes with nearby bomb impacts. A Japanese plane strafes the building, bullets punching through the roof and walls. French throws himself over his patient, shielding the already grievously injured man from further harm. When the immediate danger passes, French resumes his work, moving mechanically from one patient to the next. Burns, shrapnel wounds, compound fractures, men drowning in their own blood from punctured lungs. The injuries are endless, and the medical supplies, never intended for a catastrophe of this scale, are rapidly depleting. Chaplain Lieutenant Thomas Kirkpatrick moves among the wounded, offering what comfort he can. For some, that comfort is prayer. For others, simply holding their hand as they die. The chaplain's white uniform is stained crimson to the elbows. French pauses briefly, looking out a window toward the harbor. The Arizona continues to burn, a pillar of black smoke rising hundreds of feet into the air. Around her, the water burns as well, fueled by leaking oil bunkers. The scene doesn't seem real. It has the quality of a nightmare from which he cannot awake. A hand grips his arm. A wounded sailor, barely more than a boy, looks up at him with pleading eyes. "My brother," the sailor whispers. "He was on the Arizona too, in the forward magazine." French has no words. Anyone in the forward magazine when it detonated simply ceased to exist. There will be no body to recover, no remains to bury. "I'll find out," he lies, knowing it is a kindness. "Let's take care of you first." He returns to his work, pushing aside the knowledge that this is merely the beginning. The casualties will continue to arrive. The dying will continue to die. And the Arizona will continue to burn for 2 more days. 09 hours. USS Arizona, the burning wreck. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua remains aboard the dying vessel, the last officer on what remains of the once mighty battleship. The deck beneath his feet is hot enough to scorch his shoes. The air burns his lungs with each breath. Yet he continues his search for survivors, moving methodically through accessible areas of the aft portion of the ship. The forward section is simply gone, obliterated by the magazine explosion that broke the Arizona's back. Where hundreds of men once lived and worked, there is now only twisted metal and flame. Fuqua doesn't allow himself to dwell on this. He focuses solely on the living who might yet be saved. He discovers 3 sailors trapped in a compartment where the hatch has been jammed by warping metal. With superhuman effort, fueled by desperation, he manages to force the hatch open enough for the men to squeeze through. "Move to the port side," he directs them, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. There's a launch making pickups. As the men stumble away, Fuqua hears it, a faint tapping coming from within the ship's hull. Someone is alive in a sealed compartment, using Morse code to signal their location. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS, over and over. Fuqua tries to triangulate the sound, moving across the dangerous, unstable deck. The tapping grows slightly louder near a sealed hatch leading to a lower compartment. He attempts to open it, but finds it either locked from within or jammed. "Hello," he shouts, pounding on the metal. "This is Lieutenant Commander Fuqua. We hear you." The tapping changes rhythm, acknowledging his presence. Fuqua searches desperately for tools to force the hatch. The compartment below is almost certainly flooding. Whatever air pocket is keeping the trapped sailors alive will not last long. A massive secondary explosion rocks the ship, sending Fuqua sprawling across the deck. When he regains his footing, the tapping has stopped. The silence speaks volumes about the fate of whoever was trapped below. With Japanese aircraft still strafing the harbor, Fuqua continues his rescue efforts. He helps organize bucket brigades to fight fires where they might possibly be controlled, directs wounded men toward rescue boats, and maintains a presence of authority amid the chaos. His uniform is burned, his hands blistered, his lungs damaged by smoke, yet he refuses evacuation when a launch pulls alongside. "Still men aboard," he tells the boat crew. "I'll come when they're clear." From their position in the harbor, the launch crew witnesses Fuqua guiding 2 more injured sailors to the ship's edge. As he helps lower them into the rescue boat, a Japanese Zero makes another strafing run. Bullets walk across the water toward the Arizona's hulk. Fuqua pushes the wounded men down, shielding them with his body as rounds strike metal around them. By some miracle, none of them are hit. When the fighter passes, Fuqua continues the evacuation as if the near-death experience hadn't occurred. His calm leadership in the face of annihilation will later earn him the Medal of Honor. For now, though, He is simply a naval officer, fulfilling his duty to his ship and his men, regardless of the personal cost. 0930 hours, the waters of Pearl Harbor. The second wave of Japanese aircraft begins to withdraw, their deadly work largely complete. Of the 8 U.S. battleships present at Pearl Harbor, all have been damaged. The Oklahoma and Arizona have suffered catastrophic damage, the former capsized, the latter broken and burning. The California, Nevada, and West Virginia are sinking or sunk. Only the Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Tennessee might be salvageable. In the oil-covered waters, rescue efforts continue. Motor launches, civilian vessels, and even commandeered recreational boats move through the harbor, picking up survivors. The water itself has become a hazard. Burning oil slicks spread across the surface, and unexploded ordnance floats amid the debris. Seaman Walter Straka swims through this nightmare, pulling injured shipmates toward a whaleboat that's collecting survivors. His lungs burn from smoke inhalation, and a shrapnel wound in his shoulder leaves a trail of blood in the water behind him. Still, he continues, refusing to leave anyone behind who shows signs of life. "Here!" he calls to the whaleboat crew, supporting a badly burned sailor. "This one's still breathing." Hands reach down, pulling the wounded man aboard. Straka immediately turns back toward a group of floating survivors from what appears to be the West Virginia. "You need to come in too," shouts a petty officer from the boat. "You're bleeding out." Straka ignores the command, continuing his self-appointed rescue mission. He reaches a sailor clinging to a piece of floating debris, clearly at the limit of his strength. "I've got you," Straka assures the man, supporting him as they make their way back toward the rescue boat. Just a little further. The harbor around them continues to present scenes of unimaginable horror. Bodies float face down among the burning oil slicks. Occasionally, underwater explosions from detonating ammunition send geysers of water shooting upward, carrying with them debris and human remains. The wrecked ships continue to settle, creaking and groaning as compartments collapse and water rushes in. Most terrifying are the sounds coming from the capsized Oklahoma. Hundreds of men are trapped within the overturned hull, sealed in air pockets. The distinct sound of hammering echoes across the water as those entombed sailors signal their location, hoping for rescue that, for many, will never come. Straka delivers the exhausted sailor to the whaleboat, then begins to turn away again. "That's it, son," the petty officer says firmly, grabbing Straka's uninjured arm. "You're coming aboard now. That's an order." Too weak from blood loss to resist, Straka allows himself to be pulled into the boat. The craft is already dangerously overloaded, sitting low in the water as it maneuvers toward the nearest undamaged dock. From this position, the survivors have an unobstructed view of the Arizona. The ship that had been their home now burns with an intensity that defies comprehension. Secondary explosions continue to tear through what remains of her hull. Black smoke rises in a column so thick it blots out the sun. "All those men," whispers the sailor Straka just rescued. "All those men still aboard her." Straka says nothing. There are no words adequate to the moment. He simply watches as the Arizona, the mighty, unsinkable Arizona, continues her death throes. Later, he will learn that 1,177 of his shipmates perished in the attack, many of them still entombed within the sunken vessel's hull. For now, though, he can only bear witness to the unthinkable, his mind struggling to process the transformation of peaceful Sunday morning into the single deadliest foreign attack on American soil. 10 o'clock hours, Ford Island Command Center. Admiral Isaac Kidd and General Walter Short are presumed dead. The command structure is in disarray as surviving officers attempt to organize a response to the attack. Communications to the mainland are being reestablished after initial disruption, and the first messages reporting the attack have been sent. Lieutenant James Downing, who had been attending church services off base when the attack began, has made his way to Ford Island through the chaos. As a postal clerk, his battle station would normally be aboard the Arizona, a twist of fate that saved his life. Now, seeing the burning remains of his ship, he understands how complete the destruction is. Downing moves among the wounded gathered at the aid station, recognizing many faces from the Arizona. He begins to memorize names and home addresses of the injured, promising to write to their families, knowing that official notifications will be delayed in the confusion. The wounded men, many in shock or semi-conscious from pain medication, recite their loved ones' information by rote, naval training asserting itself even in extremis. Downing commits each to memory, determined that no family will be left wondering unnecessarily about their son's, husband's, or father's fate. Some of the men ask him to take personal effects, watches, rings, wallets, for safekeeping or to return to families. Others, knowing they are dying, whisper final messages for him to convey. Downing accepts each responsibility solemnly, the weight of their trust adding to the burden of the day. At the command center, reports continue to arrive from across the base. The attack has hit not just the fleet, but airfields as well. Nearly 200 American aircraft have been destroyed on the ground. Oil storage facilities are burning. The death toll continues to rise as more bodies are recovered and more wounded succumb to their injuries. Officers debate whether a Japanese invasion will follow the air attack. Defensive positions are being established. Ammunition distributed to any armed personnel. Civilians are being evacuated from potential target areas. The entire island of Oahu transforms into a military fortress preparing for siege. Through it all, the Arizona continues to burn, visible from every point in the harbor. The ship has become the symbol of the attack, America's pride brought low in a single devastating strike. Already, men are swearing oaths of vengeance, promising retribution for their fallen comrades. Outside the command center, Downing pauses to watch a group of sailors and Marines raising an American flag on a hastily erected pole. The flag, recovered from a small craft before it sank, is scorched and torn. Yet it rises, defiant against the smoke-filled sky. The men saluting it are bandaged, bloodied, their uniforms stained with oil and ash, but they stand straight, unbowed despite the catastrophe. In their faces, Downing sees not defeat, but a terrible resolve forming, a harbinger of the American response that will eventually stretch across the Pacific to Tokyo itself. For now, though, the work of rescue continues. The dead must be recovered, the wounded treated, the damage assessed. And the Arizona burns on, a funeral pyre for the first casualties of America's entry into the Second World War. 11 hours, beneath the waters of Pearl Harbor, the Arizona rests on the harbor bottom, her broken keel settled into the mud. Within the sunken portions of the hull, in compartments not reached by the initial explosions, men still live, trapped in dwindling air pockets, in darkness, with rising water and no hope of escape. In one such compartment, machinist's mate Robert King and 3 other sailors huddle in near-total darkness. Only the faint glow of an emergency battle lantern provides any light. The chamber is tilted at a severe angle, and seawater covers half the floor, rising incrementally with each passing minute. "They know we're here," King insists, continuing to tap out SOS on a water pipe with a wrench. "They'll cut through the hull. They're coming for us." The other men remain silent. They've been trapped for over 2 hours now. The air is growing thin, tainted with smoke that seeps in through damaged ventilation systems. 2 more sailors who had been in the compartment with them have already succumbed to their injuries. "We should conserve the light," suggests electrician's mate Paul Mages, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. "Save the battery," King nods, switching off the battle lantern. Darkness envelops them completely. A darkness so absolute it seems solid, tangible. The only sounds are their own breathing, the creaking of the settling ship around them, the distant muffled explosions of continuing ammunition detonations, and the steady drip, drip, drip of water entering their shrinking air pocket. King continues his Morse code tapping, more to maintain hope than from any real expectation of rescue. The ship's double hull, designed to withstand enemy shells, now works against its own crew, making it nearly impossible for rescuers to reach them quickly enough. "Tell us about Montana again," says storekeeper 3rd Class David Crossley, the youngest of the group at barely 18. "Tell us about the ranch." In the darkness, King smiles sadly, though no one can see it. He knows what Crossley is doing, trying to take their minds off their situation, to pass what might be their final hours with something other than terror. The ranch sits in a valley with mountains on three sides, King begins, his voice low but steady. In spring, the meadows fill with wildflowers, blue lupine and yellow balsam root. The creek runs cold even in summer, fast and clear from the snowmelt. He continues describing his family home, a place none of them will ever see. The tapping of his Morse code forms a rhythm beneath his words. SOS, SOS, over and over. Above them, the waters of Pearl Harbor continue to churn with rescue vessels. Divers will eventually reach some trapped crews, cutting through hulls to extract survivors from the Oklahoma and other vessels. But the Arizona's damage is too severe, the fires too intense, the sunken portions too deep within the burning oil slick that surrounds her. King and his companions wait in darkness as their air grows thinner and the water continues to rise. They will become part of the Arizona's silent company. 1,177 souls lost in a single morning, their remains entombed within the broken hull where they served. This compartment, like many others throughout the sunken battleship, will become a tomb, undisturbed and undisturbable. When the Arizona is declared a national memorial years later, divers will not penetrate her hull out of respect for those still within. The ship will remain their final resting place, just as it was their final duty station. 12:00 hours. The Naval Hospital at Pearl Harbor. The scene at the hospital defies description. Every bed is filled, with additional wounded lying on floors and in hallways. Medical personnel work without rest, moving from one patient to the next in a desperate effort to save as many as possible. Lieutenant Ruth Erickson, a Navy nurse, has been on duty for over 4 hours without pause. Her white uniform is stained with blood and other bodily fluids. Her hands, despite multiple washings, remain rust-colored from dried blood under her fingernails and in the creases of her skin. Morphine for this one, she directs a hospital corpsman, checking the tag on a severely burned sailor, then changes dressings. Watch for signs of infection. The burn victims are the most difficult to treat and the most difficult to bear witness to. Their injuries are not just physically devastating, but psychologically traumatizing as well. Men who were whole and healthy yesterday now lie unrecognizable, their features obliterated, their bodies transformed into landscapes of charred tissue. Many will not survive the day. Others face months or years of painful recovery, with limited reconstructive options available in 1941. Yet the medical staff works with mechanical efficiency, doing what they can with the resources at hand. In one ward, designated for the most severe cases, Seaman Donald Stratton lies semi-conscious. His burns cover more than 70% of his body, and by any reasonable medical assessment, he should not be alive. Yet his heart continues to beat, his lungs continue to draw breath. Lieutenant Erickson checks his vital signs, adjusts his morphine drip, and carefully examines the tannic acid dressings covering his burns. Against all odds, he shows signs of stabilizing rather than declining. "You're a fighter, sailor," she tells him, though she's uncertain if he can hear her. "Keep fighting." Throughout the hospital, similar scenes play out. Doctors perform emergency surgeries with assembly line efficiency, amputations, debridements, extractions of shrapnel. Nurses and corpsmen move continuously, changing dressings, administering medications, comforting the dying. The sounds are perhaps the most haunting aspect, the moans and cries of the wounded, the sharp commands of medical personnel, the clatter of surgical instruments, and underneath it all, the continued distant explosions as ammunition on the burning ships detonates. The smells are equally overwhelming. Antiseptic mingling with the metallic scent of blood, the stomach-turning odor of burned flesh, and the ever-present stench of fuel oil that clings to every survivor pulled from the harbor waters. Lieutenant Erickson pauses briefly at a window, looking out toward the harbor where the Arizona continues to burn. The massive column of smoke has not diminished in the hours since the attack. If anything, it seems to have grown, blackening the sky over Pearl Harbor. She allows herself 30 seconds, counting them precisely, to absorb the enormity of what has happened. Then she turns away from the window and returns to her duties, moving to the next bed, the next wounded sailor, the next life hanging in the balance. There will be time for grief later, time for anger, time for reckoning. For now, there is only the work of saving those who can be saved and easing the passing of those who cannot. 1,300 hours. The waters around Ford Island. Ensign Joe Langdell stands on the shore, watching as small boats continue to ferry survivors and bodies from the burning ships to land. As the Arizona's assistant dispersing officer, he had been ashore when the attack began. Another twist of fate that meant survival instead of death. Now he helps direct the recovery efforts, keeping count of the living and the dead brought from his ship. The numbers tell a horrific story. Far more body bags than walking wounded, and many of the living have injuries so severe they may yet join the ranks of the dead. "Sir," a petty officer approaches him. "They're asking for identification assistance." Langdell follows the man to a temporary morgue set up in a nearby warehouse. Inside, rows of bodies lie covered with whatever material could be found. Sheets, tablecloths, canvas tarps. Many are burned beyond recognition. Others show no visible injuries at all. Sailors who drowned or were killed by the concussive force of explosions underwater. Moving down the rows, Langdell forces himself to look at each face, to confirm identities where possible. These were his shipmates, men he had lived alongside, eaten with, worked with. Now he must catalog their deaths with bureaucratic precision, ensuring their families will know their fate. Some he recognizes immediately. Others require checking dog tags or distinctive items of clothing or personal effects. For many, identification is simply impossible. The damage too extensive, the bodies too badly burned or fragmented. The task is gruesome but necessary. Langdell moves methodically, maintaining his composure through sheer force of will and naval discipline. Each identified body receives a tag with name, rank, and service number. Each unidentified remains gets a different tag: location found, estimated time of recovery, distinguishing features, if any. Outside, the recovery continues. Divers brave the still-burning oil slicks to search for survivors in accessible portions of the sunken ships. They find few living but many dead. Bodies continue to surface as air pockets within the vessels collapse, releasing those who had been trapped. The Arizona presents particular difficulties. The fires burning atop and around her make approach dangerous. The structural damage is so severe that much of the interior is simply inaccessible. The knowledge that hundreds of men remain entombed within her hull weighs heavily on the recovery teams. Langdell finishes his grim task at the temporary morgue and returns to the shore. The harbor, once a scene of frantic activity, has taken on a different atmosphere now. The urgency of immediate rescue has given way to the methodical work of recovery and documentation. The Japanese aircraft are long gone, returning to their carriers. The surprise attack, executed with terrible efficiency, is complete. In its wake remains the shattered American Pacific Fleet and over 2,400 American dead. And still the Arizona burns, a pyre visible across the harbor, sending its column of black smoke into the Hawaiian sky. The ship has become more than a vessel now. It is a symbol of the day's losses, a marker of America's entry into the global conflict, and a grave for hundreds of servicemen who will never leave her. 1,400 hours, USS Arizona Memorial Hospital area. Pharmacist's mate First Class Gary Walsh moves among the wounded, checking dressings, administering medications, recording vital signs. The initial chaos has subsided somewhat as patients are sorted, treatments established, and routines implemented. Walsh pauses at the bedside of Seaman Donald Stratton, checking the severely burned sailor's pulse. Remarkably, it remains steady. Stratton's eyes open briefly, focusing on Walsh with surprising clarity given his condition and the morphine in his system. "The others?" Stratton manages to ask, his voice barely audible, his lips cracked and bleeding. Walsh knows immediately who he means. The other 5 men who made the harrowing journey across the line from the burning Arizona to the Vestal. Of the 6 who started the crossing, only 4 made it across. Of those four, only two still live. Bridges is here, Walsh tells him, nodding toward a nearby bed where another severely burned sailor lies. He's holding on too. What Walsh doesn't say is that the doctors have given both men minimal chances of survival. Their burns are simply too extensive, the medical capabilities of 1941 too limited. The fact that they've survived this long already defies explanation. Stratton closes his eyes again, seemingly satisfied with this small piece of information. Walsh continues his rounds, moving to other wounded men from various ships. The hospital areas are organized by vessel when possible, keeping shipmates together. The Arizona's section is the largest and the quietest. Many of her wounded are too severely injured for conversation. Some lie in medically induced comas to spare them the worst of the pain. Others have bandages covering their faces, their identities temporarily erased by gauze and tannic acid dressings. Walsh checks each one, performing his duties with mechanical precision. But beneath his professional exterior, the horror of the day has taken root. These are not anonymous patients, but men he knows, men he's treated for routine ailments, vaccinated, performed physical examinations on. Men whose medical records he's maintained and whose families he knows through their correspondence. In one bed lies machinist's mate George Hollister, pulled from the water with both legs crushed when a falling mast pinned him to the deck. Amputation seems inevitable, but the surgeons are waiting for him to stabilize before attempting the procedure. "How bad is it really, Doc?" Hollister asks when Walsh checks his vital signs. Walsh isn't a doctor, but all corpsmen are called Doc by the enlisted men. He considers sugarcoating the truth, then decides against it. These men have earned honesty. "They'll likely take both below the knee," he says quietly. "But you'll live, George. You'll go home." Hollister absorbs this information with a nod. "Better than many got today," he finally says. "Better than most of Arizona's crew." The truth of this statement hangs in the air between them. Of the Arizona's complement of 1,512 officers and men, early estimates suggest over 1,000 have perished. The final count will be 1,177 dead, making her the largest loss of life on any U.S. warship in history. Walsh moves on to his next patient, continuing the endless round of care. Through the hospital windows, the column of smoke from the still-burning Arizona remains visible, a constant reminder of the catastrophe and those still entombed within the sunken battleship. 1,500 hours. The commander's office, Pearl Harbor Naval Base. Admiral Chester Nimitz, having received urgent orders to take command of the Pacific Fleet, has not yet arrived. In his absence, the surviving senior officers struggle to assess the full scope of the damage and coordinate the ongoing recovery efforts. Commander James Morrison reviews the preliminary casualty reports with a growing sense of disbelief. The numbers seem impossible. Over 2,000 naval personnel dead, hundreds more wounded. 8 battleships damaged or sunk, numerous cruisers, destroyers, and auxiliary vessels hit. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed on the ground. "These can't be accurate," he says to Lieutenant Commander Harold Davis, who has compiled the reports. "I'm afraid they're conservative, sir," Davis responds. "The count from the Arizona alone is over 1,000 dead. Oklahoma lost nearly 400 men, and we're still finding bodies." Morrison stares at the papers before him, trying to process the scale of the disaster. The attack had lasted less than 2 hours. In that brief span, the Japanese had delivered the most devastating blow to American military power in the nation's history. "What's the status of the Arizona now?" Morrison asks. "Still burning, sir. We can't get close enough to fight the fires effectively. The heat is too intense and there are continuing ammunition explosions. The ship is a total loss." Morrison nods, having expected this answer. He had seen the Arizona's condition himself from a distance. No vessel could survive such catastrophic damage. "And rescue operations?" "Continuing, but—" Davis hesitates. "Sir, we're not finding many more survivors at this point. Most compartments that could be reached have been checked. The rest—" He doesn't complete the sentence. He doesn't need to. "The rest are tombs now, sealed by twisted metal and fire. containing the remains of men who had been alive and well at breakfast just hours ago. Beyond the window of the office, the column of smoke from the Arizona continues to rise, visible from every point in the harbor. It has become a marker, a black pillar that signifies the division between the world that existed before this morning and the one that exists now. Morrison turns his attention to more immediate concerns, organizing continued defense in case of further attacks, establishing communication with Washington, assessing which vessels might be salvageable, coordinating medical resources for the wounded. The work gives him purpose, prevents him from dwelling on the faces of men he knew who are now among the dead. There will be time for mourning later. For now, there is only the response, the recovery, the beginning of what will become America's entry into the global war. In Washington, President Roosevelt is preparing to address Congress tomorrow, asking for a declaration of war against Japan. The speech is being drafted now, with its opening line already determined. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. At Pearl Harbor, that infamous day continues. The sun begins its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the devastated naval base. And the Arizona burns on, her fires visible even as darkness approaches, a beacon marking America's devastating introduction to the Second World War. 1600 hours, Ford Island, overlooking Battleship Row. Marine Sergeant Frank Kolar stands among a group of armed men, eyes scanning the sky for any sign of returning Japanese aircraft. Intelligence reports suggest a possible third wave of attacks, or even a landing force, though neither materializes. From his position, Kolar has an unobstructed view of what was once the pride of the Pacific Fleet. The scene before him defies comprehension. The Oklahoma lies capsized, her keel exposed to the sky. The West Virginia and California sit on the harbor bottom, only their superstructures visible above the waterline. The Nevada, having made a valiant run for the sea, is beached to prevent blocking the harbor entrance. And the Arizona continues to burn with undiminished intensity, hours after the attack. Secondary explosions still rock her hull as ammunition cooks off in the intense heat. The fires are so hot they cause the surrounding air to shimmer and distort. The column of smoke rises straight up in the still air, visible for miles. "Never seen anything like it," says Corporal Thomas Watts, standing beside Kolar. "Never imagined anything like it." Kolar merely nods. There are no words adequate to the scene before them. The harbor waters, normally blue and clear, are black with oil. Debris, both mechanical and human, floats on the surface. Small boats continue to move through this apocalyptic seascape, recovering bodies and searching for improbable survivors. Most haunting are the sounds that carry across the water, the creaking of settling ships, the continued explosions from burning ammunition, the hiss of fires meeting water. And from the capsized Oklahoma comes the faint but distinct sound of tapping, trapped men signaling their location from within the overturned hull. Rescue teams work frantically on the Oklahoma's exposed keel, cutting through the steel to reach those air pockets. Some men will be saved through these efforts. Others will perish before help can reach them. The work is dangerous. The cutting torches could ignite pockets of gas within the ship, and the structure itself is unstable. No such efforts are possible on the Arizona. Her damage is too severe, her fires too intense. Those still trapped within her hull are beyond rescue. This knowledge sits heavily on every man watching the continuing conflagration. A messenger approaches Kolar's position, delivering updated orders. Defensive positions are to be maintained overnight, with rotations established to allow some rest. An attack is still considered possible, though increasingly unlikely as hour follows hour with no further sign of the Japanese fleet. As the messenger leaves, Kolar's attention is drawn to movement on the shore near the Arizona's moorings. A group of officers stands in conversation, occasionally gesturing toward the burning wreckage. Even from a distance, their body language communicates the gravity of their discussion. What Kolar cannot know is that they are already making preliminary decisions about the Arizona's fate. Unlike most of the other damaged vessels, she will not be raised, repaired, and returned to service. Her destruction is too complete, the loss of life too extensive. Instead, she will remain where she lies, eventually to become a monument and memorial to this day and to those who perished. But for now, she is still a burning warship, still the tomb for hundreds of American sailors and Marines who began this day expecting nothing more dramatic than a peaceful Sunday in port. 1700 hours. Beneath the waters of Pearl Harbor, in a sealed compartment deep within the sunken forward section of the Arizona, water continues to rise. The air pocket that has sustained machinist mate Robert King and his companions is shrinking by the minute. The battle lantern, used sparingly to conserve its battery, casts weak illumination over their desperate situation. "They're not coming, are they?" asks storekeeper David Crossley, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the settling ship. King doesn't answer immediately. He has maintained hope throughout their ordeal, insisting that rescue teams would find a way to reach them. But as hours have passed with the water steadily rising, that hope has dimmed to near extinction. "We need to face facts," says electrician's mate Paul Mages, the most pragmatic of the group. "This compartment is going to flood completely. It's just a matter of when." The fourth man in their group, gunner's mate William Lee, has been silent for the past hour, conserving his strength and what little breathable air remains. Now he speaks, his voice surprisingly steady. "My father was at Belleau Wood in the last war," he says. "Night before the big attack, he wrote letters to my mother and to me and my brother. Just in case," he said. "Always thought that was a good idea." King understands immediately what Lee is suggesting. If they are indeed beyond rescue, perhaps they can leave something behind, some final words for those they love. "We don't have paper," Crossley points out, his voice cracking. "We have the bulkhead," Mages suggests, gesturing to the metal wall of the compartment. "And I've got a knife. We can scratch messages." It seems a futile gesture. The likelihood of anyone ever reading these messages is infinitesimal. The compartment may never be accessed, the ship never raised. Yet the idea gives them purpose in their final hours. A last communication with the world above, with the families they will never see again. One by one, they take turns with Mage's knife, scratching brief messages into the metal bulkhead. Their words are terse, constrained by both the difficulty of carving into steel and the knowledge that their time is limited. "Elizabeth and James, I love you both. Be brave, Daddy. Mom and Dad, I did my duty. I wasn't afraid. Your loving son, David. Mary, you were my everything. Look for me in the stars. Forever yours, Paul. Catherine, I would have come home to you if I could. Our son will need his mother to be strong now. All my love, Robert." When they finish, they gather once more in the center of the compartment. The water has risen to their chests now. The air is growing thinner, tainted with smoke and carbon dioxide from their own exhalations. "It's been an honor serving with you," King says formally, falling back on naval tradition in this most non-traditional of circumstances. The others murmur agreement. Then, by unspoken consent, they begin to recite the Lord's Prayer together, their voices blending in the darkness of their underwater tomb. Outside their sealed compartment, the Arizona continues to burn on the surface, while settling deeper into the harbor mud. The ship that had been their home is now their eternal resting place, along with 1,173 of their shipmates. Their final messages will never be read. The compartment will never be accessed. When the Arizona is declared a national memorial, divers will not penetrate her hull out of respect for those still within. But the sentiment behind those desperate scratches on metal, love for family, dedication to duty, courage in the face of death, will be commemorated in the memorial that eventually spans her broken hull. 1800 hours. U.S. Naval Hospital, Pearl Harbor. As evening falls, the hospital continues its desperate work. The initial surge of casualties has been processed, but new wounded continue to arrive. Men pulled from the water hours after the attack, sailors injured during ongoing firefighting and rescue efforts, personnel wounded by continuing ammunition explosions on the burning ships. Lieutenant Ruth Erickson has been on duty for over 12 hours without rest. Her eyes burn from smoke and exhaustion. Her feet ache. Her hands are cracked and raw from repeated washing between patients. Still, she moves from bed to bed, checking vital signs, adjusting IVs, ensuring pain medication is administered. In the burn ward, she pauses beside Seaman Donald Stratton's bed. His condition remains critical but stable, a medical miracle given the extent of his injuries. Over 70% of his body suffered third-degree burns when the Arizona erupted in flames. By all medical knowledge of 1941, he should not be alive. Yet his pulse remained steady, his breathing labored but consistent. Something in this young sailor refuses to surrender, despite injuries that would kill most men. "You're still with us," Erickson says softly, checking his morphine drip. "Keep fighting, sailor." Stratton's eyes open briefly at the sound of her voice. Through cracked and blistered lips, he manages a single word. "Arizona?" Erickson hesitates, uncertain how to respond. The truth seems too brutal to share with a man already suffering so extensively. Yet naval personnel deserve honesty, especially regarding the fate of their vessels and shipmates. "She's gone," Erickson says gently. "The Arizona is gone. I'm sorry." Stratton's eyes close again, a single tear tracking down his ravaged face. Erickson gently wipes it away, careful not to disturb the burn dressings. She moves on to her next patient, carrying the weight of hundreds of similar conversations had throughout this longest of days. Outside the hospital windows, darkness has fallen over Pearl Harbor. But the night is not dark. It glows with the light of continuing fires. The Arizona burns on, her fires visible for miles, illuminating the harbor with their hellish light. Smaller fires burn on other damaged vessels and shore facilities. The hospital itself operates under blackout conditions, its windows covered to prevent any light from escaping that might guide a potential second attack. Inside, doctors and nurses work by the light of hooded lamps, performing emergency surgeries, changing dressings, administering what comfort they can to the suffering. Erickson finds herself beside another Arizona survivor, Fireman Second Class Louis Grabinski, pulled from the water with a compound fracture of his right leg and severe lacerations across his torso from flying shrapnel. "The boys still on her?" he asks, when she checks his splint. "The ones trapped below, they get them out?" Again, Erickson faces the dilemma of truth versus comfort. Again, she chooses truth. "No," she says simply. "The damage was too severe, the fires too intense. They couldn't be reached." Grabinski absorbs this information with a sailor's stoicism. "How many did we lose? Do they know yet?" "Early estimates put it over 1,000 just on the Arizona," Erickson tells him. "The final count won't be known for some time." The number hangs in the air between them, too large to fully comprehend. Over 1,000 men, gone in minutes, an entire floating community erased in a single morning. Grabinski turns his face away, but not before Erickson sees the grief washing over it. She continues her rounds through the night, bearing witness to the suffering, offering what comfort she can, and silently carrying the weight of 1,000 lost souls whose absence now fills the hospital with invisible ghosts. 1900 hours, Pearl Harbor Command Center. The initial shock has given way to methodical response. Officers coordinate ongoing firefighting efforts, rescue operations, and defensive preparations. The possibility of a Japanese landing force or follow-up attack cannot be discounted, despite growing evidence that the enemy fleet has withdrawn. Commander Ernest Baxter studies the preliminary damage reports with grim concentration. 8 battleships hit, of which 4 are likely total losses. 3 cruisers damaged, 3 destroyers damaged or sunk, hundreds of aircraft destroyed on the ground, infrastructure damaged across multiple bases, and the casualties defy comprehension. "Latest count from the Arizona?" he asks his aide. "Still incomplete, sir. Rescue operations have been suspended due to darkness and continuing fires. Current estimate is between 1,000 and 1,200 dead." Baxter absorbs this information without visible reaction, though internally he reels at the numbers. The Arizona's normal complement was 1,512 officers and men. If these estimates are accurate, at least two-thirds of her crew perished in the attack. What's the status of the fires? Still burning intensely, sir. We've had to pull back firefighting vessels due to continuing ammunition explosions. The forward magazine detonation was so complete that there's simply nothing left of that section of the ship. The aft portion burns uncontrollably. We're focusing efforts on preventing the fire from spreading to other vessels. Through the command center window, the night sky glows orange from the Arizona's continuing conflagration. The column of smoke is no longer visible in the darkness, but its presence is felt, a black void against the star-filled Hawaiian sky. Reports continue to arrive from across the base and from civilian authorities in Honolulu. Air raid sirens sound periodically as nervous spotters report unidentified aircraft that generally prove to be American planes returning from patrol. The atmosphere remains tense, the sense of vulnerability acute. Communications with Washington have been fully re-established. President Roosevelt will address Congress tomorrow, asking for a declaration of war against Japan. The full resources of the American military are being mobilized for what everyone now recognizes will be a long and terrible conflict. At Pearl Harbor, however, the focus remains on the immediate aftermath of the attack. Bodies continue to be recovered and identified where possible. The wounded receive treatment. Damage control teams work to stabilize listing vessels and prevent further losses. Armed personnel maintain vigilant watch against any follow-up attack, and the Arizona burns on through the night, a beacon of destruction visible across the harbor. Her fires will continue for 2 more days, gradually diminishing as all combustible material is consumed. But she will never stop leaking oil, small droplets rising from her ruptured bunkers to create rainbow slicks on the harbor surface, a phenomenon survivors will later call the tears of the Arizona. Baxter returns his attention to the tasks at hand, pushing aside the knowledge that the Pacific Fleet has been crippled in a single morning, that American power in the Pacific has been severely diminished, that the coming war will demand sacrifices beyond what anyone can currently imagine. For now, there is only the response, organized, methodical, determined. The reckoning will come later, as will the eventual victory. But on this night, with the fires of disaster still burning across Pearl Harbor, that victory seems a distant and uncertain prospect. 07 o'clock hours, December 8, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Dawn reveals the full extent of the previous day's devastation. In daylight, with the smoke partially cleared, the harbor presents a scene of apocalyptic destruction. The Oklahoma lies capsized, her keel exposed to the morning sun. The West Virginia and California sit on the harbor bottom, only their superstructures visible above the waterline. The Nevada, having made a valiant run for the sea, is beached to prevent blocking the harbor entrance. And the Arizona continues to burn, though with somewhat diminished intensity after a full day of conflagration. Her broken hull rests on the harbor bottom, the forward section obliterated by the magazine explosion, the aft section a blackened, twisted ruin. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua, having remained aboard the dying vessel through the worst of the attack, supervising rescue operations until the last possible moment, now stands on Ford Island, watching his ship's final hours. Despite 24 hours without sleep, he remains at his post, coordinating with salvage teams and providing information about the Arizona's condition. "No possibility of raising her?" asks Captain Frederick Delano, who heads the hastily assembled salvage assessment team. Fuqua shakes his head. "None, sir. The structural damage is too severe. The keel is broken. The forward section is completely gone, vaporized in the magazine explosion. What remains is burned beyond salvage." Delano makes notes, though the conclusion seems foregone. Of all the damaged vessels at Pearl Harbor, the Arizona has suffered the most catastrophic destruction. Unlike the other battleships, which might eventually be raised, repaired, and returned to service, the Arizona is a total loss. "And the men still aboard?" Delano asks, his voice lowered out of respect. "Inaccessible," Fuqua answers simply. The single word contains volumes of meaning, of grief, of acknowledgement that the Arizona has become a tomb for hundreds of American sailors and Marines. Across the harbor, rescue teams continue their work on the Oklahoma, cutting through her exposed hull to reach men trapped in air pockets within the capsized vessel. 32 men will be saved through these heroic efforts. No such rescue is possible for those entombed within the Arizona. Throughout the morning, small funeral ceremonies begin for those whose bodies have been recovered and identified. The first burials take place at Oahu Cemetery, with more scheduled at the New Uanu Cemetery and elsewhere. Many of the dead, however, will never receive individual funerals. Their remains, unrecoverable or unidentifiable, will remain within their sunken vessels. Hospital ships arrive to transfer the most severely wounded to better-equipped facilities on the mainland. Among them is Seaman Donald Stratton, whose survival continues to defy medical explanation. Despite burns over 70% of his body, he clings to life with remarkable tenacity. His journey to recovery will be long and agonizing, involving years of treatment and multiple surgeries. Yet Stratton represents hope amid the devastation, proof that survival is possible even in the face of overwhelming odds. Of the 335 men who survived the Arizona's destruction, many will carry physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. But they will live to see victory in the war that began for America on that Sunday morning. For now, though, the focus remains on response and recovery. Salvage operations begin on vessels that might be saved. Defensive positions are maintained in case of further attacks. The wounded receive treatment. The dead receive what honor can be provided under the circumstances. And the Arizona burns on, her fires visible even in daylight, a pyre for the 1,177 men who perished aboard her. The ship that had been the pride of the Pacific Fleet is now its most solemn memorial, a marker of the day that thrust America into global war. 10 hours, December 8, 1941. Honolulu, Hawaii. In the city, civilians gather around radios, listening as President Roosevelt addresses Congress, asking for a declaration of war against Japan. His words crackle through speakers across the islands. Yesterday, December 7, 1941. A date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The speech is brief but powerful, laying out the case for war in unambiguous terms. When Roosevelt finishes, there is no doubt about what will follow. America will go to war, not just against Japan, but eventually against all the Axis powers. At Pearl Harbor, those who can spare the time from ongoing rescue and recovery operations pause to listen to the President's words. They need no persuasion about the necessity of response. They have witnessed the attack firsthand, have seen their comrades killed, have watched as the mighty Pacific Fleet was crippled in a single morning. Lieutenant James Downing, the postal clerk who survived by chance because he was attending church services off base, continues his self-appointed task of writing to the families of the dead and wounded. Having memorized addresses and messages from injured men at the aid station, he now commits them to paper, fulfilling his promise that no family will be left wondering unnecessarily about their loved one's fate. In one letter after another, he recounts final messages, describes acts of bravery, and attempts to provide some measure of comfort to those who have lost sons, husbands, brothers, and fathers. The task is emotionally devastating, yet he persists, understanding the importance of personal communication beyond the official Navy telegrams that will eventually arrive. "Your son John fought bravely until the end," he writes to one family. "His last thoughts were of you, and he asked me specifically to tell you that he felt no fear, only determination to do his duty." Whether entirely accurate or not, such messages provide a form of closure that clinical naval notifications cannot. Downing writes dozens of such letters, each one a personal connection between the dead or wounded and their distant families. Meanwhile, the work of identification continues. Dog tags, personal effects, and distinctive physical characteristics allow many of the dead to be named and recorded. Others remain anonymous, their bodies too damaged for identification with the techniques available in 1941. For the men still entombed within the Arizona and other sunken vessels, there will be no individual identification. They will be recorded as missing in action, presumed dead, their exact fate and final resting place known only in general terms. Throughout the naval base, American flags fly at half-staff. Impromptu memorials appear, caps placed on empty bunks, photos posted on bulletin boards, personal items saved from lost shipmates. The grief is palpable, but so is the determination, the resolve to ensure that these deaths will not have been in vain. In Washington, Congress votes to declare war on Japan, with only one dissenting vote. Similar declarations will follow against Germany and Italy on December 11th, after those nations declare war on the United States in support of their Japanese ally. The global conflict that has raged across Europe, Africa, and Asia since 1939 now truly becomes a world war, with American entry ensuring its expanded scope and eventual outcome. But on this day, at Pearl Harbor, such geopolitical considerations remain secondary to the immediate tasks of recovery, identification, and beginning to come to terms with what has occurred. December 10, 1941. Pearl Harbor. After 3 days of continuous burning, the fires aboard the Arizona finally extinguished themselves, having consumed all available combustible material. What remains is a blackened hulk, settled into the harbor mud, only portions of her superstructure visible above the waterline. Salvage operations continue on the other damaged battleships. The California and West Virginia will eventually be raised, repaired, and returned to service. The Nevada, beached to prevent blocking the harbor entrance, will also be salvaged and rebuilt. Even the Oklahoma will be righted, though she will never sail again in naval service. But for the Arizona, no such resurrection is possible. Her destruction is too complete, her significance as a symbol too powerful. Already discussions begin about designating her wreck as a memorial to those who perished, not just the 1,177 men who died aboard her, but all 2,403 Americans killed in the attack. Chaplain Thomas Kirkpatrick conducts memorial services on Ford Island, within sight of the sunken vessel. Survivors attend, many still bandaged from their injuries, some brought from hospital beds on stretchers to pay final respects to their lost shipmates. The ceremony is brief, military in its precision and efficiency. There is no time for extended mourning. The war has begun, and those who survived have duties to fulfill. Yet the emotion is palpable as the chaplain reads the names of the confirmed dead, a list that takes nearly an hour to complete and still represents only a fraction of those lost. Lieutenant Commander Fuqua, who will later receive the Medal of Honor for his actions during the attack, stands at rigid attention throughout the ceremony. His uniform is immaculate, contrasting with the bandages still visible on his hands and neck from burns sustained while directing rescue operations aboard the burning Arizona. When the chaplain finishes, Fuqua steps forward to speak. His words are few but powerful. They died at their posts, fulfilling their duty to the last. There can be no higher praise. We who survive must ensure their sacrifice serves a purpose, that from this devastating blow will come eventual victory. The Arizona and her fallen crew will not be forgotten. As he speaks, a small delegation of civilian officials arrives, representatives from Washington sent to assess the damage and begin planning the American military response. Among them is a young naval architect who will later play a key role in designing the permanent memorial that will eventually span the Arizona's hull. The officials listen respectfully to the conclusion of the ceremony, then begin their tour of the devastated harbor. The scale of destruction remains shocking, even days after the attack, yet already signs of recovery are visible. Salvage vessels cluster around the damaged battleships. Repair crews work on less severely damaged vessels. The harbor channel remains open for naval traffic. Most significantly, the surviving ships of the Pacific Fleet, particularly the aircraft carriers that were fortunately absent during the attack, are already at sea, beginning the long campaign that will eventually carry American forces across the Pacific to Tokyo Bay. But the Arizona remains where she fell, her broken hull settling deeper into the harbor mud with each passing day. Oil continues to leak from her ruptured bunkers, creating slicks that sailors call the tears of the Arizona, or black tears. This leakage will continue for decades, a physical reminder of the wounds inflicted on December 7th. For those who survived her destruction, the Arizona will never truly cease to be their ship, their home. December 15th, 1941. Tripler Army Hospital, Oahu. The burn ward remains at capacity more than a week after the attack. The most severely injured survivors, many from the Arizona, occupy beds in long, somber rows. The air is thick with the smell of antiseptic, bandages, and the underlying scent of burned flesh that no amount of medical treatment can fully mask. Seaman Donald Stratton lies motionless, his body almost entirely wrapped in bandages. The pain is constant despite the morphine. Each breath is an exercise in agony. The doctors have been frank about his chances, slim to non-existent. With burns covering over 70% of his body, infection is almost inevitable in this pre-antibiotic era, and infection means death. Yet Stratton clings to life with remarkable tenacity. His vitals, checked hourly by nurses who have come to marvel at his resilience, remain surprisingly stable given the extent of his injuries. Lieutenant Ruth Erickson checks the chart at the foot of his bed, comparing today's numbers with yesterday's. Against all medical expectations, there are signs of improvement. Slight, but undeniable. "You're not giving up, are you, sailor?" she says quietly, adjusting his IV. Stratton's eyes open briefly. Through cracked and blistered lips, he manages a whisper. "Arizona." "I know," Erickson responds, understanding that single word contains a universe of meaning. The ship was more than steel and machinery to these men. It was home, community, identity. Its loss, and the loss of so many shipmates, represents a wound perhaps deeper than the physical trauma. In the bed beside Stratton lies fireman George Koch, another Arizona survivor with third-degree burns across his back and arms. Unlike Stratton, Koch's condition has deteriorated over the past 48 hours. Infection has set in, his temperature rising steadily despite all medical interventions. Erickson moves to his bedside, checking his pulse. It's rapid and thready, a bad sign. His breathing is labored, each inhalation a visible struggle. The bandages covering his burns have begun to seep yellowish fluid, another indicator of advancing infection. "Hang on, fireman," she encourages him, though she knows he likely cannot hear her. "Help is coming." This is only partially true. A special transport of burn victims is scheduled to depart for San Diego tomorrow, where better facilities and newer treatments await. But Erickson privately doubts Koch will survive long enough for transfer. He will become one more casualty of the attack, his death delayed, but ultimately not prevented. Throughout the ward, similar dramas unfold. Some men improve against all odds. Others succumb, despite the best efforts of medical personnel. The wounds inflicted in those brief, terrible minutes of the attack continue to claim lives days and weeks later. Corpsman Gary Walsh appears at Erickson's side, his expression grim. "Thompson just died," he says quietly, referring to a Marine from the Arizona who had seemed to be recovering. "Pulmonary embolism," they think. Nothing anyone could have done. Erickson nods, absorbing this information without visible reaction. They have all developed a professional detachment, necessary for continuing their work amid so much suffering and loss. Yet each death affects them, adding to the cumulative weight of grief and exhaustion. "Add him to the list," she says. "I'll write to his family tonight." This has become her personal ritual, writing to the families of men who die under her care, providing details that the official notifications will not include. Small comforts, perhaps, but she believes the families deserve to know that their sons, husbands, and fathers did not die alone, that someone was with them at the end. She turns back to Stratton, adjusting his bandages with gentle hands. "You're going to make it," she tells him with conviction. "You're going home." Whether he hears or comprehends is uncertain, but somehow, against all medical knowledge of the time, her prediction will prove accurate. Donald Stratton will survive, will endure years of painful recovery and rehabilitation, will eventually return to naval service, and will live to old age, one of the miraculous survivals amid the overwhelming tragedy of the Arizona. January 7, 1942, 1 month after the attack. Pearl Harbor. The harbor has transformed in the weeks since the attack. Salvage operations proceed around the clock, massive floating cranes and dive teams working to recover what can be saved from the damaged fleet. The Oklahoma, capsized and seemingly beyond recovery, is the focus of an ambitious salvage plan. Engineers have begun installing a complex system of cables and winches designed to gradually roll the massive battleship back to an upright position, a process that will take months to complete. The West Virginia and California, though sunk, remain largely intact on the harbor bottom. Plans for raising them are already in development, utilizing cofferdams and pumps to refloat the massive vessels. Both will eventually return to service, participating in the final campaigns against Japan. But the Arizona remains where she fell. Her shattered hull now a recognized tomb for the hundreds of men still entombed within her. No effort will be made to raise her or to recover those remains. The destruction is too complete, and the ship has already acquired a sacred status that makes disturbance unthinkable. Chief Warrant Officer James Miller stands on the deck of a salvage vessel, watching divers return from an inspection of the Arizona's hull. Their report confirms what has already been determined. The ship is a total loss, her keel broken, her structural integrity destroyed by the massive magazine explosion. "Oil's still coming up," reports one diver as he removes his helmet. "Seeping from the bunkers. Probably will for years." Miller nods, making notes for his report. The environmental impact of leaking oil is a secondary concern at this point, far outweighed by the symbolic significance of the vessel and those entombed within her. Through the clear harbor waters, the Arizona's hulk is visible, a massive dark shadow resting on the bottom. Fish already swim through sections of her superstructure. Marine growth has begun to appear on exposed metal surfaces. The process of reclamation has begun, the sea slowly incorporating the man-made structure into its domain. Aboard a nearby vessel, Lieutenant Commander Fuqua meets with representatives from Washington, discussing the future of the wreck. Though initial discussions of creating a memorial began almost immediately after the attack, the exigencies of war have taken precedence. Yet the idea persists that the Arizona should remain where she lies, becoming a permanent memorial to those who perished. "We can't just leave her as she is," argues one official. "It's an environmental hazard, not to mention a navigational issue. We can address those concerns without disturbing the wreck," Fuqua counters. "The men who died aboard her deserve to rest where they fell, doing their duty." His position will ultimately prevail, though the official memorial will not be constructed until years after the war ends. For now, the Arizona remains a potent symbol of surprise attack, of devastating loss, and of America's entry into global conflict. On Ford Island, construction crews work to repair damaged facilities and build new ones. The base must be made operational again. The war in the Pacific demands it. Yet work proceeds with a reverence unusual for construction sites. The proximity to the sunken Arizona, visible from shore, creates an atmosphere of solemnity that affects even civilian contractors. In the harbor waters, small boats still patrol around the wreck, maintaining a perimeter that keeps unauthorized vessels away. The site has already acquired a sacred status, drawing visitors who come to witness the physical evidence of the attack that propelled America into war. Oil continues to rise from the sunken battleship, creating rainbow-hued slicks that spread across the harbor surface. "Black tears," the sailors call them, the Arizona weeping for her lost crew. This phenomenon will continue for decades, a visceral reminder of wounds not fully healed despite the passage of time. April 1, 1942, San Diego Naval Hospital. 4 months after the attack, Seaman Donald Stratton undergoes his 9th surgery. Doctors work to repair contractures, the tightening of burned skin and underlying tissues that restricts movement and causes constant pain. Without these interventions, Stratton would be permanently crippled by his injuries. The procedure is agonizing despite anesthesia. Recovery will be worse, yet Stratton endures without complaint. displaying the same tenacity that has kept him alive against all medical expectations. In a nearby bed lies Seaman Lauren Bruner, another Arizona survivor with severe burns who crossed the same precarious line from the burning battleship to the Vestal. Like Stratton, Bruner has defied medical predictions, surviving injuries that should have been fatal. The two men have formed a bond beyond ordinary friendship, united by their shared experience and miraculous survival. They speak little of that day. The memories remain too raw, too traumatic. Yet each understands what the other endured in a way no one else can, not even the medical personnel who have treated their physical wounds. "They're scheduling me for a skin graft next week," Bruner mentions during a rare conversation about their medical treatment. "Taking it from my thigh to cover part of my arm." Stratton nods, understanding both the procedure and the pain it will entail. His own body bears the patchwork evidence of similar grafts, sections of undamaged skin removed and transplanted to cover the worst of his burns. "It gets easier," he offers, though both know this is only partially true. The procedures themselves may become more routine, but the pain never diminishes, and the psychological toll accumulates with each intervention. Captain Raymond Turnbull, chief of the burn unit, enters to check on his most remarkable patients. He has documented their cases extensively for medical journals, recognizing that Stratton and Bruner represent unprecedented survivals that may inform future treatment protocols. "How's the pain today?" he asks Stratton, examining the latest surgical site. "Manageable, sir," Stratton responds, though the tightness of his jaw and the sheen of sweat on his forehead suggest otherwise. Turnbull adjusts the morphine drip slightly, a tacit acknowledgement of the unspoken truth. These men endure pain on a scale few humans ever experience, yet they consistently downplay their suffering, maintaining the stoicism expected of naval personnel. "The latest x-rays show good bone healing in your arms," Turnbull informs him. "We'll start more aggressive physical therapy next week to prevent further muscle atrophy." This represents both good news and bad, progress in recovery, but also the promise of additional pain, as damaged tissues are forced to function again. Stratton merely nods, accepting what lies ahead with the same quiet determination that has characterized his entire recovery process. Later, when the medical staff has departed, Bruner speaks again, his voice low enough that only Stratton can hear. "Do you remember them? All of them? The ones who didn't make it across?" Stratton is silent for a long moment before answering. "Every face, every name, every day." This simple exchange reveals the burden they carry beyond their physical injuries, the psychological weight of survival when so many others perished. Both men will struggle with this aspect of their experience long after their bodies have healed as much as possible. The phenomenon would not be recognized or named until decades later: post-traumatic stress disorder, with its characteristic symptoms of intrusive memories, nightmares, emotional numbing, and hypervigilance. But in 1942, such psychological injuries receive little attention or treatment. The men are expected to endure them as stoically as they endure their physical pain. And endure they do, through months and years of surgeries, therapies, and gradual recovery. Against all medical expectations, both Stratton and Bruner will eventually return to naval service, refusing medical discharge despite their extensive injuries. The same determination that kept them alive on December 7 drives them to rejoin the fight, to ensure that their survival serves a purpose and that their lost shipmates did not die in vain. December 7, 1943, 2 years after the attack, Pearl Harbor. The harbor bears little resemblance to the scene of destruction from 2 years earlier. Salvage operations have been largely completed. The Oklahoma has been righted, though deemed irreparable for combat service. The West Virginia and California have been raised, repaired, and returned to service, participating in the American advance across the Pacific. The war continues, with American forces now on the offensive after the turning point victories at Midway, Guadalcanal, and other Pacific battlegrounds. The Japanese advance has been halted and reversed, their forces now in retreat across the vast ocean theater. But the Arizona remains where she fell, her broken hull still resting on the harbor bottom. Oil continues to seep from her ruptured bunkers, creating the black tears that sailors have come to view as a sacred phenomenon rather than an environmental concern. A small, impromptu ceremony takes place on a platform constructed near the sunken battleship's remains. No large official commemoration marks this second anniversary of the attack. The exigencies of war take precedence, and most military personnel are deployed across the Pacific theater. Yet a handful of survivors and local officials gather to pay respects to those still entombed within the Arizona's hull. Among them is Lieutenant Commander Fuqua, now serving on another vessel but returned temporarily to honor his lost shipmates. 2 years, he says quietly to Captain James Morrison, who has helped organize the modest ceremony. Sometimes it seems like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime. Morrison nods in understanding. Both men have spent these 2 years engaged in the global conflict that erupted from the attack they witnessed. The immediacy of current combat operations sometimes overshadows the memory of that Sunday morning. Yet the Arizona remains a touchstone, a physical reminder of how and why America entered the war. A small boat approaches the platform, carrying a late arrival to the ceremony. To the surprise of those gathered, it is Seaman Donald Stratton, one of the Arizona's most severely injured survivors. After 2 years of surgeries and rehabilitation, he has returned to active duty, despite burns that would have justified medical discharge. His appearance is shocking to those who had not seen him since the attack. Extensive scarring covers his visible skin, face, neck, hands. His movements are stiff, suggesting further damage to muscles and tendons beneath the surface. Yet he stands straight in his uniform, saluting as he boards the platform. Fuqua returns the salute, then breaks protocol to embrace the young sailor. No words are exchanged, none are necessary between men who shared the experience of the Arizona's final moments. The ceremony itself is brief and solemn. Names are read, not all 1,177, which would take hours, but representative samples from each division and rank. Wreaths are laid on the water above the sunken hull. A naval chaplain offers prayers for the dead and for victory in the ongoing conflict. Most powerful is the moment of silence, during which the only sounds are the gentle lapping of water against the platform and the distant activities of the working harbor. In that silence, each participant communes privately with memories of the attack and of those lost. When the ceremony concludes, participants depart quietly, returning to the duties and responsibilities of a nation at war. But Stratton remains on the platform after the others have gone, looking down at the dark shape of the Arizona visible beneath the clear harbor waters. What thoughts pass through his mind in these moments? Only he knows. Perhaps he remembers his shipmates who died when the magazine exploded. Perhaps he relives his own desperate crossing along the line to the Vestal, his skin burning, his survival uncertain. Perhaps he contemplates the strange fate that placed him on deck rather than below when the fatal bomb struck, that allowed him to be one of the few who escaped the ship's destruction. Eventually, he too departs, returning to his current assignment with a renewed sense of purpose. His survival, so improbable, so painful in its achievement, must be given meaning through continued service. The debt he owes to those who did not survive can only be repaid by helping to secure the victory they died for. The Arizona remains behind, silent sentinel and sacred tomb, its significance already transcending the immediate tragedy to become a symbol of American resilience and determination. Oil continues to rise from its ruptured compartments, the black tears that many interpret as the ship weeping for her lost crew, a physical manifestation of grief that will continue for decades to come. August 15, 1945, VJ Day, Pearl Harbor. The war is over. Japan has surrendered following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Soviet entry into the Pacific conflict. Across America, celebrations erupt. Impromptu parades, dancing in streets, jubilant displays of national relief and triumph. At Pearl Harbor, the celebration is more subdued. Those stationed here understand better than most the cost of the victory, the price paid in lives and blood beginning with that Sunday morning in December 1941 and continuing through 4 years of brutal Pacific combat. A small group gathers at the Arizona's resting place, survivors of the attack who happen to be stationed at Pearl Harbor or passing through on this historic day. Among them is Lieutenant Commander Fuqua, whose actions aboard the burning Arizona earned him the Medal of Honor, and who has served continuously throughout the Pacific campaign. No official ceremony marks the occasion. This is an impromptu gathering, men drawn to the site by a shared understanding that the circle which began here has now closed, that the war, sparked by the Arizona's destruction, has finally ended in victory. "It's done," says Chief Petty Officer Raymond Miller, who survived the attack by chance, having been assigned shore duty that morning. "We finished what they started." Fuqua nods, his expression solemn despite the day's historic significance. At what cost, though? How many didn't live to see this day? The question requires no answer. The numbers are known all too well. 2,403 American deaths in the initial attack, and tens of thousands more throughout the Pacific campaign. The human toll of the global conflict numbers in the millions when civilian casualties are included. The men stand in silence, contemplating the sunken Arizona visible beneath the harbor waters. Oil still rises from her ruptured compartments, creating rainbow slicks on the surface. The black tears that have become a recognized phenomenon, a physical manifestation of ongoing grief. "What happens to her now?" asks a young sailor, recently assigned to Pearl Harbor and unfamiliar with discussions about the Arizona's future. "She stays where she is," Fuqua answers with quiet authority. "Those men earned the right to rest where they fell. The Arizona will remain their tomb and become their memorial." This represents the consensus that has emerged over the years of war. Unlike other damaged vessels that have been raised, repaired, and returned to service, the Arizona will remain where she sank, her significance transcending her original purpose as a warship to become a symbol of sacrifice and remembrance. Plans for a formal memorial are already being discussed, though construction will not begin for more than a decade. For now, the sunken battleship speaks for itself, a visible reminder of the attack that propelled America into war and of the price paid for the victory now being celebrated. As evening approaches, the impromptu gathering disperses. The men return to their duties or to the more exuberant celebrations taking place elsewhere on the base. But each carries with them the solemn moments shared at the Arizona's resting place, a private acknowledgement that victory, however sweet, does not erase the losses that preceded it. The Arizona remains, her broken hull settling deeper into the harbor mud with each passing year, her significance growing rather than diminishing with time. The men entombed within her will never know of the victory their sacrifice helped secure, will never celebrate VJ Day or return to the peace they defended. Yet in a profound sense, this day belongs to them as much as to the living who celebrate it. The path to victory began where they fell, their deaths providing both the impetus and the resolve that sustained America through 4 years of global conflict to this final triumph. As darkness falls over Pearl Harbor, the celebrations continue, muted compared to those on the mainland, but heartfelt nonetheless. The war is over. The long struggle has ended in victory, and the Arizona bears silent witness, her significance now permanently woven into the fabric of American history and identity. May 30th, 1962. Dedication of the USS Arizona Memorial. Pearl Harbor. Nearly 21 years after the attack, the official memorial spanning the Arizona's sunken hull is complete. A graceful white structure bridges the middle portion of the ship without touching it, allowing visitors to look down upon the rusting remains visible through the clear harbor waters. The dedication ceremony draws dignitaries from Washington, military officials of all ranks, and most significantly, survivors of the Arizona and other vessels damaged in the attack. Many have traveled great distances to attend, drawn by the significance of formally recognizing what has long been an unofficial shrine. Among those present is Donald Stratton, now middle-aged, his uniform adorned with ribbons from both World War II and the Korean conflict. The severe burns he suffered aboard the Arizona have left him permanently scarred, his movements still limited by damage to muscles and connective tissues. Yet he stands straight as the ceremony commences, his expression solemn but composed. Admiral Arthur Radford delivers the principal address, his words carrying across the harbor waters to the assembled audience. This memorial stands as a tangible reminder of the sacrifice made by the 1,177 men who gave their lives aboard the Arizona, and by extension, all those who perished in defense of our nation's freedom. It serves not as a monument to war, but as a testament to the courage of those who faced it with unflinching devotion to duty. As he speaks, oil continues to rise from the Arizona's ruptured bunkers, creating small rainbow slicks on the water's surface around the memorial, the black tears that have become a recognized phenomenon. Visitors often interpret these oil droplets as the ship weeping for her lost crew, a physical manifestation of grief that continues decades after the sinking. The design of the memorial itself is deeply symbolic. The structure sags in the middle, representing the nadir of American fortunes following the attack, then rises toward the end, symbolizing the ultimate victory achieved in the war. The assembly hall at the far end features 7 large windows on either side, representing the date of the attack, the 7th day of December. Most poignant is the wall of names, a complete listing of all 1,177 men who perished aboard the Arizona, arranged by rank and alphabetically within each rating. Visitors approach this wall with reverence, many searching for particular names, fathers, uncles, brothers, friends, now permanently enshrined in white marble. Following the formal dedication, survivors are given time on the memorial before it opens to the general public. They move slowly through the structure, many visibly emotional as they confront this permanent recognition of the tragedy they experienced and the shipmates they lost. Stratton stands before the wall of names, his finger tracing over entries he knows by heart. Men from his division, sailors he had eaten breakfast with that Sunday morning, friends whose faces have never faded from his memory despite the passing decades. They're still there, he says quietly to Lauren Bruner, another severely burned survivor who stands beside him. Still at their posts. Bruner nods, understanding the complex emotions behind the simple statement. The men entombed within the Arizona never left their duty station. In a sense, they remain on active service, eternal watchmen over Pearl Harbor, and symbolic guardians of the nation they died defending. Neither man speaks of his own experiences, the desperate crossing along the line from the burning Arizona to the Vestal, the years of surgeries and painful rehabilitation, the nightmares that have never fully subsided. Such things remain largely private, shared only with others who lived through similar ordeals. Instead, they focus on the names before them, quietly honoring the memory of those who did not have the chance to grow older, to see victory, to live in the peace their sacrifice helped secure. As the day progresses, the first public visitors are admitted to the memorial. They move with appropriate solemnity through the structure, many visibly moved by the visible evidence of the sunken battleship below and by the wall of names commemorating those lost. For the survivors present, these visitors represent the continuation of memory, the passing of knowledge and understanding to generations who did not witness the attack firsthand, but must nonetheless carry its lessons forward. The memorial will serve this purpose long after the last survivor has departed, ensuring that the Arizona and her crew are not forgotten with the passage of time. As evening approaches, the ceremony concludes. Participants and visitors gradually depart, returning to the mainland or to accommodations elsewhere on Oahu. But the Arizona remains, her broken hull now permanently enshrined, her significance formally recognized by the memorial that spans but does not touch her. Oil continues to rise from her ruptured compartments, the black tears that many interpret as the ship weeping for her lost crew. This phenomenon will continue for decades more, a physical reminder of wounds not fully healed despite the passage of years, of grief that does not diminish but merely changes form with time. December 7, 2019, Pearl Harbor. the 78th anniversary commemoration. Few survivors of the attack remain alive to attend the annual ceremony. The youngest servicemen present that Sunday morning were 17 or 18 years old, making them in their mid-90s now. Time has accomplished what Japanese bombs began, gradually reducing the ranks of those who witnessed the attack firsthand. Donald Stratton passed away earlier this year at age 97, having lived a life that defied all medical expectations following his severe burns aboard the Arizona. His funeral included full military honors, recognizing not just his survival of the attack, but his subsequent return to service despite his injuries and his lifelong dedication to honoring the memory of those lost. Only 2 Arizona survivors remain, Lou Conter, 98, and Ken Potts, 98, both in attendance for what each acknowledges may be their final visit to the memorial. They are treated with the reverence due to living links to history, their presence a powerful reminder that the events commemorated here occurred within living memory, not in the distant past. The ceremony follows traditions established over decades. Military bands perform, wreaths are laid. The names of those lost aboard the Arizona are read aloud, a recitation that takes more than an hour to complete. A moment of silence is observed at 7:55 a.m., the exact time the first Japanese bombs fell. Most poignant is the interment ceremony for a deceased survivor. Following a long-standing tradition, Arizona survivors have the right to have their ashes placed within the sunken hull upon their death, rejoining their shipmates in a final act of solidarity and brotherhood. Lauren Bruner, who died earlier this year at 98, is the 44th survivor to exercise this option. The significance of this tradition resonates deeply with all present. These men, who by chance or fate survived the destruction that claimed 1,177 of their shipmates, choose in death to return to the vessel where they served, to rejoin the shipmates who never left, who remain eternally at their duty stations within the sunken hull. Navy divers carry Bruner's ashes to the Arizona, placing them within one of the gun turrets, a solemn ceremony that represents the closing of a circle begun on that Sunday morning 78 years ago. Bruner, who survived terrible burns and the harrowing crossing from the burning Arizona to the Vestal, who endured years of painful recovery and rehabilitation, who lived a full life in the decades that followed, returns at last to the ship that nearly claimed his life as a young man. Oil continues to rise from the Arizona's ruptured bunkers, creating the black tears that have become a recognized phenomenon. Remarkably, this leakage has continued for nearly 8 decades, a physical manifestation of grief that spans generations, a tangible link between past and present. Visitors to the memorial, many born long after the events commemorated here, watch the ceremony with appropriate solemnity. For them, the attack on Pearl Harbor is history, learned through books, films, and educational programs. Yet the physical presence of the Arizona, visible beneath the memorial, and the dwindling number of survivors provide connections to that history that transcend academic understanding. As the ceremony concludes, the surviving Arizona sailors are escorted from the memorial with full honors. Their advanced age makes each movement difficult, each step a testament to their determination to bear witness as long as physically possible. They understand their role as living links to history, as carriers of memory that will soon pass entirely into secondhand accounts. The Arizona remains behind, her significance undiminished by the passage of time. If anything, the memorial has grown in importance as direct memory of the attack fades, providing a physical anchor for historical understanding that might otherwise become abstract or distant. Oil continues to rise from her ruptured compartments, the black tears that began on December 7, 1941, and have never ceased. Engineers estimate this leakage might continue for another 500 years before the remaining oil is exhausted, ensuring that this physical manifestation of grief will outlive not just the survivors, but many generations to come. In this persistence, in this refusal to be forgotten, lies the true legacy of the Arizona and her crew. The ship remains a powerful symbol of surprise attack, of devastating loss, of national resilience, and ultimately of the price paid for the freedoms enjoyed by subsequent generations. Present day. The USS Arizona Memorial, Pearl Harbor. The memorial receives more than 1.8 million visitors annually, people from across America and around the world who come to bear witness to history and to pay respects to those entombed below. No survivors of the Arizona remain alive. The last, Ken Potts, died in 2023 at age 102. With his passing, the direct link to the events of December 7, 1941, was severed. What was once living memory now exists only in recorded accounts, in written histories, and in the physical evidence of the sunken battleship itself. Yet the significance of the Arizona remains undiminished. If anything, the memorial has grown in importance as direct witnesses to the attack have departed, providing a tangible connection to events that might otherwise recede into abstract history. Oil continues to rise from the Arizona's ruptured bunkers, creating the black tears that began on December 7, 1941, and have never ceased. This phenomenon, once considered an environmental concern, is now protected as part of the memorial's historical significance. The droplets rising to the surface, approximately 9 quarts of oil each day, provide a physical manifestation of grief that spans generations. Visitors to the memorial move with appropriate solemnity through the white structure spanning the sunken hull. Many pause before the wall of names, searching for particular entries. Grandfathers, great-uncles, distant relatives now known only through family stories and photographs. Others simply absorb the enormity of the loss represented by those 1,177 names etched in marble. Looking down into the clear harbor waters, visitors can see portions of the Arizona's hull, the physical evidence of destruction that claims so many lives in so short a time. Marine growth partially obscures the rusting metal, nature gradually incorporating the man-made structure into its domain. Yet the outlines remain clear, the evidence of catastrophic damage still visible after more than 8 decades. Most powerful is the knowledge that the men who died aboard the Arizona remain where they fell, still at their duty stations within the sunken hull. The ship is not merely a historical artifact, but an active military cemetery, a resting place for hundreds of servicemen who perished in the opening minutes of America's involvement in World War II. The annual December 7 ceremony continues, though no survivors remain to participate. Military bands still perform, wreaths are still laid, the names of the dead are still read aloud. The tradition of interring deceased survivors within the hull has ended with the passing of the last Arizona sailor. But the significance of this practice, of men returning in death to rejoin shipmates lost decades earlier, remains a powerful testament to the bonds forged in service and sacrifice. Park rangers and historians now bear the responsibility of telling the Arizona's story, of ensuring that the significance of December 7, 1941 is not forgotten as generations pass and direct memory fades. They describe not just the attack itself, but the individual stories of courage and sacrifice that unfolded aboard the doomed battleship. Stories of men like Donald Stratton and Bruner, who survived against all odds, and of hundreds more who perished at their posts. The Arizona has transcended its original purpose as a warship to become something far more significant. A symbol of national resilience, a reminder of the cost of unpreparedness, a testament to the price paid for the freedoms enjoyed by subsequent generations. The memorial ensures that those who perished aboard her are not forgotten, that their sacrifice retains meaning despite the passage of decades, and the oil continues to rise. The black tears that began on that Sunday morning and have never ceased, a physical manifestation of grief that spans generations and will continue long after all who remember the attack have themselves passed into history. In this persistence, in this refusal to be forgotten, lies the true legacy of the Arizona and her crew. Though the men who served aboard her are gone, their story endures. A chapter in American history written in courage, sacrifice, and the terrible, swift violence of modern warfare. The memorial ensures that future generations will continue to learn from their experience, to honor their memory, and to recognize the price paid for the peace and security too often taken for granted. The narrative adheres strictly to documented events, timelines, and personal accounts. Where minor details have been dramatized for narrative effect, they remain consistent with historical reality and the documented experiences of those who lived through the attack on Pearl Harbor and its aftermath. No fictional characters or events have been introduced. All individuals named in the narrative were actual historical persons who experienced the events described. The horror of this story lies not in fictional embellishment, but in the documented reality of what occurred at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and in the days, months, and years that followed.